In my opinion, Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door is an almost flawless game. It is a pure joy from the very moment we arrive in Rogueport until we defeat the very final boss. The game is such a complete package, such a wonderful journey filled to the brim with memorable characters, tons of crazy ideas, secrets to uncover, interesting scenarios to survive, enemies to fight, fuzzies to admire and partners to team up with. It's just wonderful, an almost flawless game in which each part of it works together to create something greater than the sum of its parts. With the Thousand Year Door, Nintendo simply struck gold. They came up with an almost perfect formula for a game. And then they never did it again. Every single Paper Mario game that came after altered or removed parts of the formula that made the Thousand Year Door so great. And every single Paper Mario after ended up being worse in one way or another. While there's a lot that I like about the later Paper Mario games, at least in my opinion, the series peaked 2 decades ago and never reached the same level of condensed awesomeness that the Thousand Year Door is made up of. And you know, that's kinda interesting. Why is the Thousand Year Door such a great game? Why did all the later Paper Marios that changed this formula ended up being worse for it? What is it that makes the Thousand Year Door such a great game, and why did Nintendo have such a hard time to replicate this success? In this video, we will try to solve this little mystery. We will once again visit Rogueport and its surroundings. We'll discuss what makes the Thousand Year Door's gameplay so amazing and discuss what the game could have done even better. We will discuss translations and the writing, whether the remake holds up to the original, waffle about controversies surrounding the game's launch and dig into the game's story, all with a greater goal in mind. Figuring out what made the Thousand Year Door so great and why no other Paper Mario game after it was able to recapture the same magic in its entirety. We got tons of things to discuss. Before we start, just one more thing. Due to the nature of this video, this thing is going to spoil the entirety of Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, including the final boss fight. Don't worry, that is not the final boss fight in the background yet, that's just Princess Peach cooking something up. Hooray! So let's get this thing going. My name is Ceave, you're watching Ceave Perspective, a place that hopes to give an interesting perspective on great games. This is Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. Before the historic event known to mankind as the Big Breath of the Wildification, the 3D Zelda games usually followed a very simple formula. After a short narrative intro, Link set out to retrieve several pieces of a very important mystical artifact. This mystical artifact is usually hidden in dangerous dungeons. The dangerous dungeons are hidden in memorable areas, and within the dangerous dungeons, Link acquires a powerful and ancient item that allows him to overcome the dungeon's many tricky challenges and to solve many head-scratching puzzles. The Metroid games usually follow a very simple formula. Everyone's second favorite bounty hunter finds herself on an alien planet. Isolated and alone, she sets out to explore the planet's many mysteries while encountering many progress-blocking roadblocks. After defeating dangerous foes and exploring many mysterious areas, Samus learns new abilities like Morph Ballification, which allow her to overcome the blocking obstacles with ease. The official 2024 Dungeons & Dragons adventure, Vecna: Eve of Ruin, follows a very simple structure, not unusual for a D&D campaign. Vecna, everyone's favorite lich god, has an evil plan to destroy the world as we know it, only to reshape it again to his evil liking. The world's only chance of survival, a brave bunch of tremendously bold adventurers. The only way to stop the evil lich god is by finding and combining 7 parts of the fittingly named Rod of 7 Parts. Those 7 parts are hidden all over the multiverse. The hunt for the pieces has our adventurers dive to the shipwrecks of ships wrecked long ago on the Astral Sea or into haunted houses in the Realm of Terror. The Pokemon games follow a very simple structure. On our journey to become the very best Pokemon trainer, we enslave as many cute creatures as possible and have them claw it out with other captured creatures in turn-based battles. While traveling from city to city, we make it through many different environments and find many precious items hidden along the way. Amongst those items are so-called technical machines, powerful devices that teach our creatures new combat abilities. Alrighty, right, so that was quite the opening. So why are we talking about the structure of Zelda, Pokemon, D&D or Metroid at the beginning of a video about the 1000-Year Door, one might ask? Well, for a surprisingly simple answer, because the 1000-Year Door is derivative of all those games in one way or another, but one thing after the other. First, let's actually start the game proper. The game begins with the opening of a book. The book tells the tale of an ancient city that long ago sank below the sea. Many years later, a new settlement was founded on the very spot that this city sank, and this settlement is the city of Rogueport. Deep below Rogueport, there is something called the 1000-Year Door, and behind this door there is a treasure hidden of the civilization that came before. And then the book shows us our first glimpse of Rogueport's central square, and on this very central square, something very curious is already present. We get our first glimpse at something that tells us a lot about the design philosophy of the game, namely this massive wooden chest. Rogueport is at the center of the game, and at the very center of the game's center, there is a gigantic wooden chest that we cannot reach. Whenever we return to the town, we see this huge chest and wonder what riches may slumber inside of it. Please try to remember this huge chest, it is actually important, and it will be part of the final exam. So Rogueport is probably best described as the place to be if you aspire to get robbed or assaulted. The city is controlled by two rivaling crime syndicates. It is the perfect place to be cheated out of some money or to get kidnapped. So naturally, Princess Peach made a short stop there on her holidays. Peach buys a treasure map from a suspicious merchant. This map shows the location to the 7 stars. The 7 stars are what is needed to open the 1000-Year Door. As suspected, Peach gets promptly kidnapped, but only after sending the map to Mario. Upon receiving the map, Mario immediately acts as every diligent friend-zoned plumber would do. He drops everything to immediately aid his crush and to find the ancient treasure. But upon arriving, Peach is nowhere to be found. Instead, we meet a pretty young Goomba scholar named Goombella and soon find out that Peach disappeared and that our best shot at finding her is to find the 7 stars first and to unlock the 1000-Year Door. And with this, the game gets going. Our first task is to locate said 1000-Year Door. Thus we team up with the legendary and brilliant Goomba scholar, Professor Frankly, and head towards the potential location of the 1000-Year Door below Rogueport sewers. The sewers are a big maze-like dungeon below the city that can be accessed through various spots and that are filled to the brim with things to discover. There are useful items hidden all over the place, like delicious yum yum mushrooms that allow Mario to restore his health, or devastating fire flowers that fatally burn our enemies. There are hidden star pieces, a useful little currency that can be traded in for some of the most useful items in the game. And finally, there are badges to discover. And badges are one of Paper Mario's best systems. You see, badges are equipable items that either alter the gameplay significantly or teach our plumber new and powerful plumbing moves to use in combat. There are badges that teach Mario to cause earthquakes by heavily hammering his hammer. There are badges that raise Mario or his partner's defense, badges that increase Mario's health, and most importantly of all, badges that change the sound effects of Mario's attacks. To wear those badges, we need badge points. Whenever we level up, we can choose to increase our health, our flower points, which are a Mushroom Kingdified version of mana, or our maximum amount of badge points. Each badge costs a certain amount of badge points, so the more points we have, the more gameplay altering badges we can wear. And I cannot tell you how much I love this system. You see, the badges are basically a skill tree. It's skills that we choose to use and unlock as we level up. But instead of learning all those fancy skills in a skill tree, as is so common these days, the 1000-Year Door cleverly hid all those skills in the overworld. Behind every tree, there could be a new passive skill slumbering, and every hard-to-reach question block could potentially contain a new and powerful attack move. This makes exploring the many secrets of the world incredibly rewarding. And it is where Paper Mario shares similarities to the Pokemon series. You see, the exploration in Paper Mario is set up in a similar way as it is in Pokemon. The traditional Pokemon games, TMs and helpful combat items are hidden all over the place. Exploring the many routes and picking up its many items is usually a lot of fun, because every item could be a potentially game-changing upgrade for combat in the form of a new Pokemon move. The same way every hidden item has the potential to be a game changer in Paper Mario, and that is something that really adds to both those games in my opinion. But let's head back to our adventuring party in the sewers, because as it turns out, they are in trouble. A bunch of rude and grumpy Goombas are blocking our way. Not only do those Goombas refuse to let 2 academics and a world-famous mustached hero pass by, they also call us surface-level snubs. There's just one logical reaction to such an affront, and that is to tell them that it stinks down here. And thus we settle the matter with violence. After defeating the stinking Goompas, we already find the 1000-year door. To unlock it, we need to find 7 stars. Conveniently, the door tells us where to find the first star. The first star is located close to the city of Petalburg in the beautiful meadows. And thus we travel there by pipe, and chapter 1 of the game officially begins. And it begins with a bang. You see, immediately after arriving, a gigantic dragon flies over us. Oh and no. Turns out the poor city of Petalburg is terrorized by the evil dragon Hooktail, who lives in a castle north of town. Even oh and nowhere, the power star is in Hooktail's possession. So the goal of the very first chapter is to slay a dragon. This is in general something that Paper Mario is really good at. Every chapter confronts us with a new and different scenario that we have to solve. Chapter 1, we have to slay a dragon. In the second, we have to help helpful petals to reclaim their home tree. In the third, we have to become the champion of an arena. In the fourth, we have to investigate a curse plaguing a village, and so on. Which is where the structure of the D&D adventure Eve of Ruin enters the picture again. Every chapter is a self-contained adventure that ends with Mario gaining a star piece. Between each adventure, Mario returns to his home base, in this case, the city of Rogueport, and from there on, he sets out on a new adventure. Pen and paper adventures and traditional RPGs are often structured around wildly varying mini-adventures that together form an even bigger central adventure. And it is this traditional structure that Paper Mario borrows, and it helps to keep the adventure varied and unpredictable over its runtime. So back to our dragon slaying plumber. Our first task is now to figure out how to enter Hooktail's castle, and this is sadly where my first major problem with the 1000-year door pops up. Okay. So here's the thing. To enter Hooktail's castle, we have to find the Sun and the Moonstone. We find those stones at the end of the meadows in an underground area guarded by a Thwomp who challenges us for a quiz, and all of that is fine. It's fun. However, look, I'm not an unreasonable man. I understand that the 1000-year door is a Mario game, and understand that it is part of Mario games to fight against fuzzies. I can handle violence towards fuzzies to a certain degree. The problem isn't that the Sun and Moonstone are guarded by fuzzies which we pointlessly have to slaughter. That's okay, really, I can handle that. But once we grab the stones and return, this happens. We encounter a beautiful yellow fuzzy, which we once again pointlessly have to murder before the fuzzy calls all her fuzzy friends, and then we suddenly face hundreds of fuzzies at once. Luckily, the fuzzies flee after a while because look at Mario's eyes. The crazy guy was determined to kill them all. So, I know what you're currently thinking. How the fuzzy did the 1000-year door remake only end up having a PEGI rating of 7+ and an ESRB rating of E for everyone if it contains what I can only describe as graphic depictions of pointless violence against innocent creatures? Well, I can actually answer that. You see, the ESRB board that does the age recommendations for America and the PEGI board does them for Europe actually don't play the games, they rate. They get a filled out questionnaire from Nintendo in which Nintendo tells them how much violence, gambling, sexual innuendo or adult themes in general are present in the game, and they rate it according to this data. If it's a big release like the 1000-year door, they probably also play the game for an hour or two to make sure the publisher isn't misleading them, but that's it. Nintendo probably lied in the questionnaire and didn't mention that the game contains drastic depictions of fuzzy genocide, and the rating team never made it to this point in the game, which is how Nintendo was able to cheat their way to a PEGI 7 rating. Moving on, after mentally recovering from this terrible crime, we make our way towards Hooktail's castle and gain our second partner, Koops the Cooper. So over the course of the game, our party grows and grows. Each new partner not only acts as a new partner for fights, but all the partners also have a unique field ability that we can use while we are teamed up with them. And Koops the Cooper can retreat in his Koopa shell and activate contraptions or grab distant items this way. And this is where Metroid enters the picture again. You see, the field abilities of our partners, be it Koops being able to grab distant items, Yoshi being able to flatter over pits, or Madame Flurry blowing away debris. All those abilities are power-ups, the same way obtaining, for example, the ability to morph is a power-up for Samus in a Metroid game. Just like in the Metroid games, we often encounter obstacles that block our path or that prevent us from reaching precious treasure, which we cannot bypass. But then we continue playing, get a new ability or two, and suddenly we are able to make it past the obstacle, the partners, the paper curses, and the hammer and jump boot upgrades in Paper Mario are functionally the same as new powers are in Metroid. And just like in Metroid, gaining those new powers gives us a nice feeling of growth over the course of the game, while also making sure that backtracking stays enjoyable. Awesome. So together with our new friend, Koops the Koopa, we finally make it into Hooktail's castle. The castle is a very intimidating place. There are dangerous, dead dry bones to fight, traps to tap into, creative puzzles to solve that reward us with keys which we can use to unlock locked doors, and there is even a new ability for Mario hidden within the castle. The ability to turn ourselves around, which makes us paper thin and allows us to pass through narrow holes. At the end of the castle, we finally encounter Hooktail and defeat her in an epic boss battle, before finally being rewarded with our very first Power Star. And believe it or not, this is where the Zelda series enters the picture again. You see, Hooktail's castle is structurally almost identical to a typical Zelda dungeon. It is an interesting and intimidating place that is filled with puzzles, enemies and secrets which we have to learn a new ability, unlock locked doors, and in the end defeat a dungeon boss, turn a mystical and powerful artifact. And it is not just Hooktail's castle that is like this. Almost all the chapters in the Thousand-Year Door end in a dungeon-like structure. The second chapter has the tree, the fourth the mansion, the fifth the pirate cave, the sixth the train station, and the final chapter has the base of the Exnauts. And just like in the Zelda series, those dungeon-like structures give each chapter a nice highlight towards the end, in which we grow in power and are once again tested on our combat and puzzle-solving abilities. Hooray! And with this, we can finally combine the different pieces. You see, at its core, the Thousand-Year Door is an insane genre mix that combines elements of almost all of Nintendo's most popular franchises, and even more. There are the turn-based battles, the different fighting partners, and the way items and different attacks are hidden all over the map, which is very similar to Pokémon. The game is structured in several smaller adventures like old-school or tabletop RPGs often are, yet the gameplay progression is very similar to a Metroid game, with lots of obstacles that we can only bypass after learning specific powers. Finally, the different chapters often end in places that are structurally very similar to Zelda's dungeons. Also, and that one may surprise you the most, but there's also a lot of Mario baked into the game, from the aesthetics to the core conflict of the story to even some platforming elements. The Thousand-Year Door is this insanely ambitious genre mix between Metroidvania, D&D campaign, Mario platformer, Zelda and Pokémon, with even a bit of WarioWare sprinkled in it. And while this sounds completely insane on the surface, it somehow ends up working flawlessly. And the longer the game goes on, the better it gets. So we will return to the question of how the Thousand-Year Door manages to mix all those different genres without falling apart. But first, we need to establish a bit more fluff. Let's first quickly travel through the different chapters of the game together, and let's discuss a couple of different interesting aspects of it along the way. The second crystal star is in the possession of the Punies, proud petals that live inside the great tree of the forest. Sadly, the Punies are in trouble. As it turns out, we aren't the only ones looking for the crystal stars. There is also another section searching for the shiny pointy crystals, the Exnauts. And those Exnauts are the very people who have kidnapped Peach. After chapter 1, we actually take control over Peach for a moment and explore the Exnaut base on our own. There, we become friends with a sentient supercomputer called Tech, who is not only fantastic at computing, but also has a serious crush on the princess. The computer allows Peach to send us an email, which is how we learn about the plans of the Exnauts, and in the Great Tree, we encounter the Exnauts for the very first time ourselves. Inside the tree, the Thousand-Year Door bends the genres even further and borrows elements from the Pikmin series. We now have to rescue more and more Punies, who all follow us and solve a varying amount of puzzles together with our pedal crew. But the Punies aren't what I find interesting here. Neither are the puzzles or the combat. The thing that I really find interesting here is this health block. You see, those blocks are basically jumpable ins. If Mario hits his head against a hard block hard enough, then the block takes a bunch of Mario's coins and in return heals Mario. So on the surface, this little block is a harmless little block like all the others. But that is only on the surface. You see, the Thousand-Year Door is an almost flawless game in my opinion. But almost flawless also means that there are some flaws left in it. And this little block is emblematic for what, in my opinion, is Paper Mario's biggest flaw. The problem is not that the block heals us. The problem is what happens if the block does not heal us. The old The Legend of Zelda games are all wonderful games that are vastly different in tone and style, yet they all have one thing in common. They all use the same shopping system. You see, if we want to buy an item in, say, Twilight Princess, then we usually have to walk into the shop, talk to the shop owner, cycle through all the items on display, pick one, confirm that we want to buy it, and then we have to watch a small cutscene of us obtaining the item before we are ready to buy something else. So a shop system like this has a couple of benefits over the normal list-based shops that we often see in games. First, we get to see what the shop has to offer on a glimpse. Second, we get to chatter a bit with the shopkeeper whenever we want to buy something, which allows the devs to give the owner and the shop a lot of personality. And finally, such a system is a bit more immersive to interact with than just to shop in a list. The old Zelda shop layout, however, also has a major flaw, namely that it is incredibly slow. You know, it is tedious to buy multiple things in a row in a system like this. The Zelda games get away with the system because the shops aren't that central to the core experience. So the fact that the shops have a bit more personality wins over the problem that they are clunky to use. It's a fitting system for a game like Ocarina of Time or Twilight Princess. Cool, but what has that to do with Paper Mario again? Well, the Thousand Year Door uses a shop system very similar to the one the old Zelda games use. But unlike those games, Paper Mario isn't able to get away with such a clunky system that easily. In the Thousand Year Door, the inventory of the shop is also in front of us. We buy stuff by walking towards it and by clicking through several prompts. If we want to sell something or access our storage, we have to talk to the shop owner. It's not possible to buy multiple items of one kind, neither can we sell more than a single item at a time. The inventory is limited to 15 items only, so we likely regularly have to store or withdraw items. And in the first half of the game, coins are really useful, which means we are likely to sell a lot of things as well. But the game's shop system is just not built to be used all the time. It's way too clunky, and because of this, shopping in the Thousand Year Door becomes tedious after a bit. So if the shop system were the only slow-moving interface in the game, it would hardly be worth a mention. It is, however, not. All over the game, there are small systems that are a tiny bit too slow and waste our time unnecessarily. The main menu takes an unusually long time to settle after switching between one of the main windows, which makes flipping through the pages feel surprisingly horrible. Picking up an item when our inventory is already full and deciding which one to keep is slow. In combat, the audience cheers sometimes take a while to slowly fill our star meter, which can slow down combat a bit. Commands like defend or appeal in combat are hidden behind sub-menus. You know, in a perfect world, those commands would have a button shortcut, like for example keeping X pressed for 2 seconds to input a defend action. And while it is understandable that the game doesn't have a skip text button in the major dialogue, there is no real reason why text can't be skipped for minor conversations, like when talking to random people in a city. And finally, there is the health block. You see, when we jump towards it while we are at full HP, the game stops for a second and a big window pops up telling us that we can't heal since we are already at full health. The thing is, there's just no reason why the block can't say this without stopping the game, like in something like a small text box right above it. None of those things are really serious problems, but they add up. Especially games with turn-based combat really need quick and snappy user interfaces to waste as little time as possible on menus during fights. If Nintendo were to ever do a direct sequel to The Thousand Year Door, the user interface is the one area in the game that I think can still be improved significantly. Hooray! After rescuing all the punies in the tree and after defeating the evil X-Nauts, we're finally rewarded with the second power star. Up we go to Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is my favorite chapter in the game. Chapter 3 is so amazing. Its setting is pretty much Phantom of the Opera meets professional wrestling. Here's the setup. The next crystal star is hidden in Glitz City. Glitz City is a floating city in the sky, mainly built around a single attraction, its fighting arena. From all around the Mushroom Kingdom, aspiring champions travel to the city with the goal of becoming the next champion of the arena. But only one fighter can wear the champion belt, the strongest one. And gaining this champion belt is our goal for the chapter. So why would we like to wear this legendary belt, one might ask? Well, because the next crystal star is embedded in it. And thus we enlist as an arena fighter with the goal of becoming the champion, not knowing yet that the star on the belt is actually fake and that all of the arena is built upon a dark secret. And yeah, I love it. The whole thing is just an explosion of creativity and charm. The second we land, we're introduced to the champion in an amazing way. There are posters of aspiring fighters all over the place. The more we advance in rank, the nicer our training room becomes. The mystery going on in the background is an amazing tease. All the battles have cool twists and are against genuinely interesting foes, and Yeah, I love it. One of my favorite moments of the chapter is when we chat with Grubba for the very first time. Grubba is the owner of the arena and an old champion himself. We tell him that we aspire to become a champion of the arena, and his answer is this thoughtful monologue about the nature of fame. He tells us, and I quote, "Now tell me straight, son, you wanna live the glorious life of a champ, don't ya?" To which we reply, "Darn skippy." Grubba immediately answers, all right, son, I hear where you're coming from, loud and clear." Thoughtful, he walks towards us and says, "When I was just a poor pup, I didn't give a pokey spatoot for fancy big city ways, but I jumped into the world of material arts and fought my way to fame and riches. And you know what I realized? Being rich and famous is diggity dang dynamite." When I was a little kid, long before I gave a blue purse bottom about the loading properties of Pokeballs, my parents got me a game. And this game was called Link's Awakening, a game on the original Game Boy in all its brick-like glory. So, I'm from Austria, which means during my childhood I played most games in their German version, including Link's Awakening. And the German version of Link's Awakening is really interesting, in a way one might not expect immediately. You see, early in the game, we run into those enemies called buzz blobs. If we sprinkle those enemies with a pinch of magical powder, they become all worked up about it and start to talk to us. And in the German version of the game, the buzz blob has 4 different, really interesting things to say. It either says, "Stop the war, give peace a chance," in English and in caps lock, or it says, "Irgendwelche Sorgen, Nöte oder Probleme," which translates to any worries, hardships or troubles. Or the little guy says, "Gib mir deinen Saft, ich geb dir meinen," which translates to "give me your juice and I'll give you mine." But the most interesting thing that the buzz blob has to say is the following: "Nie ohne Kondom," which translates to "never without a condom," in all caps, once again. Huh. What had happened here? Well, to understand how the little guy ended up ditching out sex ed tips, we have to chat about the person responsible for the German translation of Link's Awakening, a lovely chat called Cloud Moise. You see, Cloud Moise got a job at Nintendo of Europe as a copywriter early in his career, made a couple of career steps in a rather quick succession, and suddenly already was responsible for the German translation of many high-profile Nintendo games, like for example Donkey Kong Country, the original Pokémon games, or Link's Awakening. And Cloud Moise was certainly a gifted writer. He did, however, not speak Japanese in the slightest, which made his job of translating Japanese games exceptionally challenging. Often he would have an English scripted hand that helped him with the translation, but sometimes he would not. And if there was no script, he had to deduce what was being said just by looking at the scene. And this is probably how we ended up with the unusual buzz blob translations in the German version of Link's Awakening. Young Claude Moise probably was confronted with the problem of writing a translation of what the phallus-shaped buzz blob is saying when tickled with magical powder, and he didn't have the slightest clue what the Japanese script meant. And thus, he probably decided to just embrace the absurdness of the situation, which is how we ended up with arguably useful sex ed tips in Link's Awakening. For whatever reason, those lines were changed for the Game Boy Color release of the game, by the way. No idea why, they were objectively flawless. So in the early 90s, video game translations often were rough, especially in German, though to Claude's defense, while he did not speak Japanese, he at least spoke German, something that can't be said about all German translators at that time, but that's a different story. So why are we waffling about the wild world of early 90s video game translations in a video about the 1000-year door, one might ask? Well, here's the thing, Link's Awakening is just roughly a decade older than the 1000-year door is, but during this decade, video game translations improved by an insane amount, which brings us back to Diggity Dang Dynamite. You see, the dialogue we just waffled about is word for word like this in the original version of the game, and this dialogue is written brilliantly, including Mario saying darn skippy to agree. But this dialogue wasn't originally written in English, it was written in Japanese, so whoever translated the text did a brilliant job. And the same was true for the German version of the 1000-year door. While the translation is not as sharp as the English one, it is still more than good enough to enjoy the game. You know, the 1000-year door is often rightfully praised for its brilliant writing, but what I seldomly see praised is the insanely great translation. In 2004, Nintendo already was able to translate text-heavy games like this without losing their magic, which is a huge achievement in at least my humble opinion. The English translation of the 1000-year door is just Diggity Dang Dynamite, even though I'm slightly disappointed that the translation doesn't feature a single out-of-place sex education joke, though this probably explains why the original 1000 Year Door release got a PEGI rating of 3 years and older. Awesome. So I really like this grubber guy. A shame he's the evil villain of this chapter. You see, while we fight our way to the top of the league, strange things suddenly start to happen. We get emails warning us to stop investigating the arena. Other contestants suddenly disappear without a trace, and someone even attempts to take us out by sending us a delicious poisonous cake. Slowly, we unravel the mystery of what is going on. First, we team up with a baby Yoshi and fight against the champion of the arena, where we find out that it was the champion who was trying to poison us. And then our investigations reveal to us the true evil and dark secret of the ring. Turns out Grubba has been absorbing the powers of the other fighters, robbing them of all their life essence during the process, just so that he himself can stay young and strong. What a diggity dang no-no. Beating him up we go. After defeating Grubba, we finally find the third power star, and my favorite chapter of the game comes to a close. Next, we have to investigate the creepy steeple near Twilight Town. But before we make our way to it, we first take control over Princess Peach again. Once again, we meet up with Tech, but this time, Tech has an unusual request for Peach. The computer asks her to dress up as an X-Naut and to sneakily sneak up to their leader, Sir Grodus. So, why does Tech want us to do this? Well, he wants us to ask Sir Grodus a very important question. A question of utmost importance. A question so important he can only entrust us with the task of finding the answer to it. And then he tells Peach the question he wants her to ask Sir Grodus. But we do not hear the question. Instead, the screen fades to black. At the beginning of the video, we talked about the big chest in the center of Rogueport, a chest so central to Rogueport's design that the very first glimpse of the city we ever get already prominently features it. You see, this chest doesn't only serve a decorative purpose, it is actually a fully functional chest containing precious loot. But this chest doesn't just contain any kind of loot. We actually encounter chests like this several times on our adventure. Those chests contain critical upgrades for a plumber. The hammer or jumping upgrades are always found in chests like this. So at the very center of the game, there is a precious power-up hidden for Heroic Plumber, and whenever we walk past this spot, which is very often, this chest laughs at us from its heightened point of view, because we have absolutely no way to reach it. At the beginning of the game, when we first head down the sewers, our path leads us past those iron bars. We can't make it past them yet. However, we already encounter a creature that can make it past it. A lonely puny stands outside. Whenever we get close to it, however, the puny runs back in its hole in terror. It is only after finding our first power star that we can finally follow the puny. At the west side of Rogueport, there is a shop. Whenever we enter the shop building, the cool transition of the house unfolding as we enter its place. But we do not only see the interior of the shop here, we also see something else. We see a shine sprite. Those shine sprites are the currency with which we upgrade our partners. They're really useful. We really want to hit this box with our hammer. However, there is no way to reach it when we first enter the shop. So whenever we walk into the shop, this shine sprite teases us while we uselessly stand inside the shop, looking at it in desire. Alrighty, right. So what do those four things have in common? Why do we waffle about the mysterious contents of the central chest, about a puny fleeing in terror, a shine sprite teasing us throughout most of the game, or Tech telling Peach to ask a question without revealing to us what the question is at first? What do those things have in common? Well, here's the thing. They all tease us in one way or another. All four things make us curious without gratifying our curiosity immediately. We run past this chest dozens of times, wondering how and when we'll get the precious upgrade that is inside it. We see the shine sprite over and over again whenever we enter the shop and get teased on how and when we will finally be able to grab it. When we run past the cute little puny for the first time, we can't interact with it yet, but get teased about the events of chapter 2, and the mysterious question that we have to ask as Peach is another tease, where the game makes us curious about the question but doesn't tell us what the question is until later. The game just throws tons and tons of things in our way that we wonder about. The sewers are stacked with items items and puzzles that we all can't solve the first time we encounter them. Like the chest in the very first room of the sewers, or the chest in the room with the spikes, or any chest really. All over the map we find those paper boat platforms that we can't interact with till the final third of the game. Most side characters are introduced long before we actually team up with them. We often get glimpses of upcoming chapters, like talking to the train staff in Rogueport or Flavio hanging out in the inn. Even the most central mystery of the entire story is a gigantic tease. The game is built around the mystery of what slumbers behind the 1000-year door. Throughout the game, opening this door is always our goal, yet most of the game we have absolutely no clue what is hiding behind it. Over and over again, Paper Mario the 1000-year door throws things in our path that intrigue us, but whose mysteries we can't yet solve. It gives the game an almost addictive quality, where there are so many things that we're curious about at once that we just want to continue playing, just so that we finally find out how to reach the chest or what the mysterious question is all about. Speaking of which, after successfully dressing up as an X-Naut, we finally confront Grottos with the question that Tech considered to be of such utmost importance. And the question is, what Grottos plans to do with Peach going forward. Looks like Tech is really worried about our damsel in distress. So how's Mario doing? He made his way into Twilight Town, a dark and mysterious place that is plagued by a curse. He found out that whenever the bell tolls, one of the villagers is transformed into a pig, and next he made his way into the creepy steeple, a haunted steeple to the east of the city. There he fought his way to the top of it and confronted a dangerous ghost. He seemingly defeated the ghost, but it was a Pyrrhic victory as the ghost stole his identity, and now our poor plumber is running around as Violet Goob while the ghost is pretending to be the real Mario? Oh and no, it looks like we can't leave our plumber alone for just a couple of minutes without him getting into some serious trouble. The fourth chapter features a lot of backtracking. First, we head to the steeple, where we get our identity stolen. Then we head back to the city to figure out what to do next. Next we learn that we have to call the identity-stealing ghost by its real name to defeat it. Then we team up with Vivian. Next we head back to the steeple to learn the ghost's name, head back to confront him with his real name, only for him to escape and us once again heading back to the creepy steeple to finally actually defeat him. And that's a bit too much heading for my modest taste. Luckily, the 2024 remake of the game added a warp pipe, which takes us from the town back to the boss, allowing us to skip the final track back, which might be a good time to talk about the remake. So the remake. Overall, I think that the remake turned out great. There's just one thing which I kinda dislike, and one thing that I think they really messed up. So the most obvious stuff first. The remake added a lot of quality of life things. There is the warp pipe, which I just talked about. There are pipes to all main cities in the sewers that significantly cut down the backtracking in the final chapter. There is now a partner wheel that allows us to quickly swap partners. There's the art and sound gallery and tons of other small changes. All things that I like and that I think add to the game. Then there are the things that are more controversial, like the new soundtrack. So the original, the 1000-Year Door soundtrack, is among my favorite Mario soundtracks ever. When I heard that they decided to redo the entire thing, I'm very skeptical, to say the least. There's just no reason to change something that already worked so brilliantly. Luckily, they included the Nostalgic Tunes badge that allows us to switch the soundtrack back to the original tunes. So when I started my playthrough, I immediately grabbed the badge and then switched between the two soundtracks regularly to find out which one I prefer. And to my very honest surprise, I ended up preferring the new soundtrack, which is doubly surprising because the new soundtrack is really different. The new songs have a very different energy to them. They feel much more like the soundtrack of Origami King than the original 1000-Year Door soundtrack. There is a lot of female singing, there are lots of heavy guitars. The entire new soundtrack feels more energetic, more powerful and more overwhelming than the old one. The original soundtrack was really close to the sound of the traditional Mario games of that era. The new one, however, takes a completely different turn. It gives off a completely different energy. I think one track that is really symptomatic for how the soundtrack changed is the Crystal Star theme. Let's take a listen. The old one sounds like this. A really cool and memorable track. Here's the new one. Do you notice how it gives off a completely new vibe and energy, even though it is clearly the same song? pretty different, isn't it? It is a really bold and unusual choice to go for such a different sound in a game with such a beloved soundtrack, but yeah, overall I think they pulled it off, which brings us to the graphic changes. But before we discuss those, we first have to continue along our journey for a bit. So the next crystal star is hidden on the tropical island of Keelhaul Key. Thus we hire a ship captain, Flavio, find a bombastic navigator and set sail into the unknown, only to immediately be attacked by ghosts and to end up shipwrecked on the shore. Mario is really down on his luck in this game, isn't he? We explore the island searching for the crystal star while trying to figure out how to ever escape it again. And I have to say, the island looks gorgeous. All over the game, the remake noticeably improved the graphics, and nowhere is the upgrade more visible than on the island. Don't get me wrong, the original game still looks great, but the remake somehow managed to add so much life to those environments. In my opinion, it really improved upon them. The game suddenly looks truly great, even by 2024 standards. There are just so many small tweaks and changes to the graphics, from the texture overhauls, to the new lighting and the backgrounds, to the fact that many characters got additional animations. It really all adds together to make the game look more alive overall. And then there are the reflective surfaces. Those weird, shiny, reflective surfaces. So for whatever reason, the remake changed tons and tons of surfaces to be incredibly shiny and reflective. So I generally wouldn't mind it if they added a bit of reflectiveness to surfaces that are supposed to be reflective, like the metal in the X-Naut base or water puddles. That looks good. The problem is that they also decided to have the characters mirror themselves on surfaces that normally are not reflective. Like the stones in Hooktail's castle suddenly are as reflective as a mirror, or the dirt on the path to the creepy steeple suddenly reflects us like a puddle of water. Those surfaces wouldn't naturally reflect light the way they do in the game. But you know, normal paper also isn't this reflective and shiny. So if dirt isn't reflective and paper isn't reflective, then I'm a bit confused on why they decided to make the paper dirt reflective, to say the least. The reflections really took me out of the game a fair bit, and I think they overtuned them by a lot. Finally, there is one gameplay change that I think hurts the overall experience. A change that seems very harmless on the surface, but that comes with a red tail of problems. And a change that we can actually see after we defeat this chapter's boss. You see, after exploring the island for a bit, Mario finds the entrance to a hidden pirate cave, and at the end of this cave, our poor plumber runs into the remains of a cursed undead pirate captain. The pirate is quite a challenging boss fight, but that's not where the problem arises. The problem pops up after we defeat him, because after we defeat him, we are rewarded with 100 coins. And that is true for all the main bosses in the game. One change of the remake is that we are rewarded with 100 coins after every major boss, and I think that's something they didn't think through in its entirety. So look, I get where they are coming from. Beating the chapter bosses is a huge celebratory moment, and not gaining any monetary reward for it always felt a bit hollow. How and ever, those 100 coins leave a really lasting impact on the game's economy. You know, we can't just hand out hundreds and hundreds of additional coins over the course of the game without heavily adjusting what things we can buy and how much they cost. The fact that we now suddenly get almost 1,000 coins extra over the course of the game just makes it a lot easier to buy all the badges we want and all the items we desire. Because of this, I ended up with way too many coins and nothing I really wanted to spend them on much sooner than I usually do in a playthrough, and yeah, that's kind of a step in the wrong direction. Cool. So overall, I think the remake turned out really great, apart from the dumb shiny and that there are too many evil coins, which is my surprisingly predictable hot take, I guess. Actually, that's my take, but what about the rest of the World Wide Web? What kind of narrative is forming around the remake? Do people enjoy it as much as I do? Well, let's quickly check this. Okay, so Nintendo censored Paper Mario? Oh, the game has apparently gone woke? Please don't do this. They censored the game. Nintendo censored it. Nintendo ruined the game. Oh boy. Nintendo destroyed the game. The game is causing outrage. A DEI group busted the game. BlackRock ruined not only the game, but apparently Nintendo as well. Oh my fuzzy, people are getting seriously angry over the game. We were just having so much fun around here. Okay. Truth be told, the outrage is way less dramatic than it may look at first glance, you know? None of those channels are significant enough to really move a needle. However, it is undeniable that a certain corner of the internet got, let's call it very strong emotions about the remake. So usually I'd happily ignore the complaints about the game that are, radiating out of this specific corner of the interweb, but this time this is a bit different. You see, as it turns out, there is something quite surprising that we can dig up if we actually shovel ourselves into the middle of this scandalous scandal. Because as it turns out, there is actually a really interesting trend going on in all of gaming, a trend that largely goes unnoticed, but that actually truly has influenced how companies like Nintendo approach their games. A trend that may even sometimes have forced the publisher to compromise on their artistic vision of a game. Oh no! An external force that, dare I say it, may even censor companies like Nintendo in what they can safely say and do in their games. But one thing after the other. So the alleged crime that took place is censorship. The scene of the crime are the rogueport sewers. Here's what happened. Do you remember the encounter with the 3 Goomba bros at the very beginning of the game? The 3 Goomba bros that called us surface level snobs and that Goombella in return told that their living place stinks before we settle the dispute with headbutts and hammers. Well, those 3 Goombas are the victims of runaway censorship. In the original version of the game, those 3 Goombas said something very different. Here is what got censored. Originally they said, hey man, what's up? Who's the hottie you got there with you? What's up, baby? Why don't you hang out with us for a while? We play real nice. Man, what's a fine-looking Goomba like you doing with a tubby mustache man like that? To which Goombella replies, oh, it is like so sweet that you think I'm cute seriously. Yeah, guys like you make me feel like totally barfing. Now get out of our way. And then the Goombas react all, you think you're better than us, and battle ensues. As it turns out, there was a catcalling scene in the original The Thousand Year Door, and this catcalling scene got censored for some mysterious reason. This is the big censorship crime that is going on, and this scene is a huge part in what is causing all the outrage. Alright, gentle ladies, gentlemen, and gentle people in general, let's figure this case out together. You see, Mario now continues his journey by train. On this train, Mario has to solve a crime mystery before he finally arrives at the next crystal star. But we will not aid Mario in solving this train case. We will do something different. We will take a different train ourselves. And on that train, we will solve a different crime case. We will investigate and figure out who forced Nintendo to change the catcalling Goomba scene. So please take a seat and make yourself comfortable. The first class and the dining sections are in the front section of the train. Our next stop is the answer to the question: gentle ladies, gentlemen, and gentle people in general, welcome aboard our metaphorical train. Welcome aboard a crime scene. A truly terrifying crime took place on our current method of transportation. The victim is Nintendo. The crime is censorship of the Goombella catcalling. The suspects, well, this is where things get really interesting. See, we aren't the only passengers aboard this train. There are 4 other parties traveling with us as well. We already know that one of them must be the culprit, but we do not know who of them. The 4 suspects are: first, a golden venture capitalist Bobomb. He's golden, he's shiny, he's greedy beyond what is healthy, and he's always suspect when an artistic vision explodes in a creative industry. Our second suspect is Waluigi, a mischievous version of Mario's lawful brother, who ended up being on our train as well. No seriously righteous person has a signature scream like this. Wah! That's the sound of an internet troll. Our third suspects are a group of exceptionally woke toads. They are destined to better the world according to their values, and they often protest injustice long before it even takes place. Word on the street has it that those woke toads sometimes have unreasonable expectations of moral pureness to the art they consume, so they are as suspicious as they come. And our fourth and final suspect is Togepi. The little guy is also on the train. I don't think that Togepi already has reached the age of criminal responsibility, though what do I know? Alright, so 4 suspects are corporate greed, represented by Golden Bobomb, internet trolls, represented by Waluigi, postmodernism or wokeism, represented by a group of woke toads, and finally, Togepi. So how do we figure out which one of them committed the crime? Well, by thoroughly investigating the train, and by looking for evidence, of course. You see, there are 5 cabins on this train. Each one one contains one piece of evidence on who committed the crime and why. We'll first take a look at the 5 different pieces of evidence, and afterwards we will use our brilliant deductive abilities to crack the case. We will solve the case of who is censoring Nintendo. We will find out who cancelled the catcalling. So let's take a look at what piece of evidence is hidden in the first train cabin. Would you look at this? It is a glitched part of a video we did a while ago about, let me see, Majora's Mask. Well, I didn't expect Majora's Mask to be involved in all of this. Let's take a listen. But it's not the fact that we find the Triforce here that is so fascinating. The fascinating thing is where we find it. Here's the thing, however. Those blocks aren't merely blocks with faces. If we take a closer look at them, then we can see that they are clearly shaped like cowering humans. And if we take a look at the bottom of those blocks, then we can find the Triforce on them, directly above the butt cheeks, on the spot where the genitals would be. To make matters even worse, the creatures lick the poor Triforce. So if you think this is kind of out of place for a Zelda game, don't worry, Nintendo felt the same way, because this Triforce is mysteriously missing in a 3DS remake. And with this, the clip ends. Oh look, that's not all that is hidden here. There are also a couple of random screenshots of Ocarina of Time lying around on the floor. There's a picture of Ganon coughing up blood, a picture of the Great Fairy, and a picture of the fight against the dead hand boss in the well. Alright, I don't know about you, but so far, I already have absolutely no idea what this supposedly has to do with the censored catcalling scene, but I'm sure everything will make sense once we screened all the evidence. Let's see what we find in the second cabin. Here we go. Our second hint is a VHS tape containing a short clip from this very video. Someone hastily scribbled "missing sex ed throwaway line" on top of it. Huh. Let's take a listen. The English translation of the 1000-Year Door is just diggity dang dynamite, even though I'm slightly disappointed that the translation doesn't feature a single out-of-place sex education joke, though this probably explains why the original 1000-Year Door release got a PEGI rating of 3 years and older. Mysterious. Not sure what to make of this yet. Let's see what is hidden in the third train cabin. Interesting, it's a bunch of wiki pages from the Zelda wiki. There's the wiki page for Ocarina of Time and the one for the 3DS remake. There is one for Majora's Mask and one for its remake as well, and then there's... No, it looks like that's it. That's our third piece of evidence. Interesting, so Majora's Mask again. I begin to see a pattern. I just don't understand it yet. Let's see what evidence is hidden in the fourth cabin. It's another VHS tape. This one is labeled "A Short and Incomplete History of Feminist Media Critique." Oh wow, that sounds like a really terrible idea. No way we're doing this. Sorry folks, but I just don't feel like setting myself on fire. I'm sure we can solve this case without taking a dive into anything that starts with F and ends with ism. Let's see what evidence we find in the fifth cabin. The final piece of evidence is once again a VHS tape. This one is labeled "Fussy Massacre of 2024. It's once again a part of this very video. Let's take a listen. Nintendo probably lied in the questionnaire and didn't mention that the game contains drastic depictions of fuzzy genocide, and the rating team never made it to this point in the game, which is how Nintendo was able to cheat their way to a PEGI 7 rating. Mysterious. So let's see what we got as evidence. We have a clip of our Majora's Mask video discussing how the Triforce is depicted in a bit of a gross way, and a couple of screenshots of Ocarina of Time. We have a short clip of a throwaway line of this very video about how the game doesn't feature inappropriate sex ed comments. We have screenshots of the Wikipedia pages for Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time and their 3DS remakes, a VHS tape called "A Short and Incomplete History of Feminist Media Critique" that I'm not even willing to touch with a stick, and then we have this video titled "The Fuzzy Massacre." Wait a second, did you hear this? What in all the fuzzy's names was that? Oh, the venture capital capitalist Bob Orm just exploded? Well, I guess that reduces the number of suspects down to 3. That one was surprisingly easy to remove, but wait a second. If we think logically, we can remove another suspect as well. Waluigi is obviously innocent. You see, Waluigi simply neither had a motive nor the opportunity to troll Nintendo. But that's not even the reason why we can already deduce with certainty that he's innocent. The reason why we know that it is impossible for Waluigi to censor Nintendo is a different one. Just think about it. Waluigi doesn't even have enough influence in Nintendo to get his own game. How in the world should he ever be able to get them to censor something? Which leaves us with only 2 suspects, Togepi and a group of woke toads. I already have a strong suspicion on who the real culprit is, but we somehow have to prove it. Let's see. Maybe Togepi wanted to be part of Majora's Mask, but he couldn't. No, that doesn't make any sense. Maybe the rampant fuzzy violence distracted everyone at Nintendo, which gave the toads an opportunity to sneak in and push their No, that doesn't make any sense either. I'm afraid we're stuck here. Oh no. I'm afraid we don't have all the puzzle pieces necessary yet to actually solve this. I'm afraid our only chance to solve this mystery is to actually take a look at all the evidence. Alright, VHS tape. I guess you won. Let's take a quick listen at the incomplete and very basics of feminist media theory. To understand the basic ideas of feminist media theory and feminist media critique, we best start long before the age of the internet and video games. We best start in the late 19th century. You see, being a woman in the late 19th century wasn't exactly the place to be, for a couple of reasons. Many rights that we nowadays take for granted didn't exist yet. Back in the day, women had no right to vote. Women were not accepted at colleges or universities, locking them out of higher education. Married women had no property rights. Husbands had actually so much legal power over their wives that they could legally imprison or beat them. Divorce law heavily favored men. Women were not allowed to work most jobs, and in the rare cases that they were allowed to work, they got barely any pay, and so on. The details are a bit fuzzy, and depending on where you live, things may have been a bit better or worse about 150 years ago, but overall, that's the gist. Women were just heavily discriminated against by law, and the early feminists set out to change that. Little by little and step by step, they fought against this legal discrimination, and little by little they won the fight, though some discriminations were surprisingly difficult to get rid of. In Germany, for example, women only were allowed to open a bank account on their own in 1962, and married women only gained the right to work without the permission of their husbands as late as 1977. That's well within the lifespan of my mom, for example. But overall, most direct legal discriminations against women were either abolished or on their way out by the 1950s. But feminism, famously, didn't end there. You see, the first feminists were fighting to abolish direct legal discrimination against women, but they were not necessarily concerned with questioning the role of women in society as a whole. You know, they were fighting for equal rights for women, but early feminists weren't necessarily fighting against society's idea of womanhood. But that changed around the 1950s, because around this time, a new and hip philosophy hit the mainstream, the philosophy of existentialism. Existentialists come forward with the idea that there is no essence that defines us. Whatever we end up being is the result of our existence. Or in other words, we're not born as what we are, we become what we are. It is our existence and our experiences that form us, not an inherent essence. Or as Sartre famously put it, existence precedes essence. And this is where a young and brilliant thinker called Simone de Beauvoir enters the stage. Her thoughts were pretty close to those of Sartre, quite literally actually, the two were a couple. Simone de Beauvoir's book The Second Sex explores the idea of womanhood through an existentialist angle. In The Second Sex, she famously claimed that one is not born a woman, but becomes one. But she's not talking about biology here. What she means is that our concept of what it means to be a woman is something that is constructed by society. It is something that can be changed. What we think that being a woman or being a man means is not dictated by a given, by God or by an inherent essence, but it is an evolving concept that can be changed. We best let her self-explain what she meant with it.
C'est que être femme, ce n'est pas une donnée naturelle. C'est le résultat d'une histoire. Il n'y a pas un destin biologique, psychologique qui définisse la femme en tant que telle. C'est une histoire qu'il a faite.
Alright, so I promise this is relevant to understand the catcalling Goombas. Just one more thing. You see, around the time of The Second Sex, and in part because of her work, the focus of the mainstream feminist movement changed. If the role of being a woman is no longer clearly defined by a God-given essence, but is something that is up for debate and can be changed, then a couple of really interesting questions arise. You know, if we're all theoretically free to become whatever we want to be, if there is no God-given essence that dictates how we ought to be as a man or as a woman, then where do our ideas of what it means to be a good man or a good woman actually stem from? Who predefined what it means to be a man or a woman? Are those ideas helpful or harmful? And most interestingly, for our little purposes here, how are those ideas replicated? And there are a couple of obvious answers to this question. The education system, our uprising, how people around us interpret their role as a woman, and finally, the media. And thus clever feminist thinkers start to deconstruct how women are depicted in all of media. You know, are women in active roles with an agenda for themselves, or are they passive? Are they a prize to be won? Are they depicted as wives or as objects of sexual desires, or mainly as mothers, and so on? The general idea is that if the media almost exclusively represents women in passive roles, or as mothers, or whatever really, then young women will grow up with an idea of womanhood that is passive and understands womanhood as being mainly about motherhood, or about whatever. Alright, so here's something that is often misunderstood, but that's important. This is not a moral framework. This is not a thing good, thing bad discussion. Analyzing what kind of media gets made, how women are depicted in it, and drawing conclusions about what role models the media replicates does not say anything about the quality of a certain piece of media. A movie isn't good or bad because it depicts women in an active or passive role. The problem is never the specific piece of media. The problem arises when the entirety of media only replicates harmful stereotypes. So at the super duper basic level, feminist media critique starts by looking at a single piece of media and asks how women are represented in it. And after doing this for enough pieces of media, it zooms out and asks how women in its entirety are depicted in media, and in return what this very depiction means for a societal idea of womanhood. And this is a process that is permanently changing. You know, in the 60s, mainstream movies often depicted female characters as damsels in distress that needed to be saved by a hero. In 2024, however, this is obviously no longer the case, and the discussion has shifted. Nowadays, there are different conversations going on. Like, you know, if female characters in mainstream media are too often depicted childless, and this is erasing a certain experience of womanhood, or if the female perspective in media is only the perspective of a certain subgroup of women, or if strong female characters, like the typical female leads in a Marvel movie, for example, aren't replicating new, different stereotypes that may be harmful in other ways. Stuff like this. Okay, so most modern feminist movements aren't rooted in gender essentialism, but in gender existentialism. They believe that society's idea of what it means to be a woman, or a man for that matter, is an open, ever-changing construct, and that this construct is replicated and reinforced by media. Feminist media analysis now tries to understand what role models media is replicating, and if those role models are harmful or helpful for women at large. Cool, so why are we waffling about all of this again, one might ask? Well, because with all of this in mind, we can take a closer look at the catcalling Goombella scene and analyze if this scene is replicating harmful stereotypes. And the answer is no. Not in the slightest. If anything, the censored scene is actually quite progressive. You see, the three Goombas are presented as douchebags here. They aren't framed in a positive light. Their catcalling is framed in a way that makes it clear that they are idiots. But it is also not Mario that defends Goombella. Even though there is a man right beside her, she defends herself. She defends herself against the evil catcallers by sarcastically thanking them, and afterwards by telling them that comments like that one make her wanna barf. And afterwards, she herself is involved in a battle against the controversial Goombas, and the Goombas are defeated. So you know, the catcalling is done by someone who is framed negatively. The girl that is being catcalled actively defends herself and is actively involved in the beating up of the catcallers. So if we are a man, the scene implies to us that catcalling is disgusting and that women do not like it. And if we are a woman, it implies that it is okay to speak out against the catcaller and to actively defend oneself. Apart from the fact that we're still speaking about Goombas, if we were to seriously look at this through a very basic feminist lens, then the scene is, if anything, progressive. Okay, so at this point, we can return back to our own passenger cabin and finally solve our case. You see, the group of woke toads is innocent. If the catcalling scene was, if anything, progressive, then the woke folks lack a motive to censor Nintendo. There is just nothing about this scene that could potentially cause an outrage. And with this, we did it. There's only one suspect left. Togepi. Looks like Togepi is the one censoring Nintendo. Well, that's quite a surprise. I genuinely like the little guy. Huh. So, you know, usually I'd call it a day here and say, let's all go over to Twitter and publicly shame Togepi off the platform, but, you know, I just have this feeling that we might have missed something. I just can't figure out Togepi's motive. What are we missing here? There's Ganon coughing blood. There is the Triforce at the butt cheeks, Simone de Beauvoir, the random sex ad line in this video, the fuzzy murder that really should have justified a higher Peggy rate. Wait a second. The Peggy ratings. Oh my god, how did we miss this? Of course, the Peggy and the ESRB ratings. Check this out. In the part about the Fuzzy Massacre, it states that the game has a Peggy rating of 7, which is also what is printed onto my copy of the game. But in the other part it says that the original version of the game was rated for 3 years and older. So the remake was considered to be less child-friendly than the original game was 20 years earlier. It all makes sense now, the wiki articles of the Zelda games. Look at this, the original release of Ocarina of Times and of Majora's Mask had an ESRB rating of E for everyone, even though the games featured things like the Triforce on the butt cheeks, or Ganon coughing up blood, or the Fairy Queen in very revealing clothes, or disgusting and unsettling foes like the Dead Hand. The remakes of the 2 Zelda games actually reduced the amount of unsettling things shown and went with a more child-friendly art style, yet even though those games have a more child-friendly aesthetic, overall they were rated to be for kids age 10 plus. Even more insane, take a look at this. The original Majora's Mask was rated by the ESRB again when it was re-released for the Nintendo Switch Online, but this time it got a T rating, meaning the game is only a good fit for teenagers and older. The exact game that in 2000 was considered to be fine for everyone was rated to be only for teenagers in 2022. The age ratings got strict over time, but that means that the Togepi is innocent. You see, one of the things that causes a game to have a 10 plus or a T rating are minimal suggestive themes. Goombas calling Goombella a hottie or a baby and telling her that she should hang out with them because they play real nice is, well, it's minimal suggestive. To make matters even worse, the scene takes place very early in the game and is on the critical path for it, so if one of the people rating the game were to actually play it for an hour or two, this scene is very likely one of the few scenes that they encounter. Since the ESRB and those ratings in general got a lot stricter over the past decades, Nintendo could have gotten a 10 plus or even a T rating if they were unlucky, and thus it was probably safer for them just to change the dialogue slightly. So the true culprit who is censoring Nintendo is actually Nintendo themselves. Just to be clear, I can't prove this, but it would make a lot of sense, because there is actually another change in the remake as well, one where we know that it is because of age rating concerns. Nintendo removed all the gambling from the casino, because in 2024, gambling mechanics mean a game gets an instant T rating, but 2 decades earlier, regulators didn't care about this. Gentle ladies, gentlemen, and gentle people in general, we did it. We solved our case. Turns out, the culprit censoring Nintendo is Nintendo. I can't believe we almost framed an innocent Pokemon. That was close. And with this, we also finally identified the real trend that is going on in the gaming industry. The trend that is actually forcing companies to compromise on their artistic vision for games. The age ratings. The age rating boards got more conservative over the past 2 decades. So, speaking to all of you wonderful activists out there, worried about censorship in video games, to all of you who are fighting for free speech absolutism, if you truly care that vital scenes like the Goomba sewer catcalling scene can stay in games in all their artistic masterfulness, if you're among the people who truly were worried because of this and who not only faked their concern for less honorable means, then here's what you can actually do. You may want to reach out to your local representative and ask them to allow for more sexual innuendo to be allowed in children's media. Hooray! So how has Mario's train ride been? He also solved the mysterious crime case. In his case, someone first ate all the soup and he tracked down who ate it, and afterwards he stopped an evil plan to cover the entire train in goop. Wow, I guess he had a lot more fun than we did. We find the 6th and second to last star in the village of Poshley Heights, the village the train was traveling to. With this, there is only one final crystal star left that Mario has to track down, and this star is the one the furthest away from us. The 7th and final crystal star is the hardest to reach, quite literally, because it is located on the moon. You see, the X-Nauts are actually in possession of the final crystal star, so we have to raid their base and steal it from them. So far so good. How and ever, they built their evil hideout on the moon. So how do we reach it, one might ask? And the obvious answer is obviously by shooting ourselves up there by using a gigantic N64 cannon. And there we go, raiding the X-Naut base. So this place might be a good spot to talk about combat, because I may have accidentally broken the combat system a bit with my build. I went with a build this playthrough that is probably best described as a glass mustache build. You see, there are two stats that influence how much damage we deal during combat. To no one's surprise, those two stats are attack and defense. The game uses an incredibly simple formula to calculate the two against each other. The damage we deal is our attack value minus the enemy's defense value. That's it. The simple damage scaling is really easy to understand while still allowing for a surprising amount of strategic depth. It works great for this specific kind of game in my opinion. The damage, health and defense scaling stays really grounded over the entire game. You know, enemies in the early game may have 4 health points, but enemies in the final third may only have 9. Everything stays together really close, which means even if we use a suboptimal build or are underleveled, we will probably do fine in combat. Which brings us to our glass mustache build. Here's the thing, in turn-based games, I usually always go for very aggressive builds. I just tend to enjoy turn-based combat more when the fights are over quickly, and thus I usually invest almost everything into offensive talents. And so I went for a very offensive build. I only put 2 or 3 levels into health and flower points, just enough to not get one shot and to cast a couple of abilities, and then I stacked all my levels into badge points. With those badge points, I equipped badges that increase Mario's damage. There are badges that add 1 to our global attack value. There are badges that add 1 to Mario's jump attack value, but prevent him from using his hammer. There are badges that make Mario take more damage while also raising his attack, and so on. Our little plumber is wearing them all. To counter the problem of only being able to use jumps, I equipped Mario with badges that allowed him to jump on burning or otherwise ouching enemies, and to raise Mario's attack even further, I used the star power ability with which we can raise our damage by another 3 or 4 points in important fights. And the result is kinda game-breakingly strong. See, there are jump attacks in the game that allow us to hit an enemy multiple times in a row, dealing almost our full attack value to them every time we hit. We combine this with Yoshi, who also has attacks that hit enemies several times, and the result is well, depending on the enemy's defense value, we can chop out between 50 to 100 damage to a single enemy in a turn this way. Just to put things into perspective, Magnus von Grappel 2.0, the final boss of the 7th chapter, has 70 HP. Or in other words, in the second half of the game, every boss went down after only 1 or 2 attacks, which was admittedly a bit easy, but also a lot of fun. You know, I really like that the game allowed me to break it like this. The combat mechanics in the 1000-Year Door may be simple on the surface, but there's actually a surprisingly high amount of build variety possible in it. I'm sure it's possible to come up with a turtle build in which Mario is electric and stacks so much defense that he's almost invincible, while using a partner that heals him should he ever get damaged, or to make a build that focuses on Mario's hammer or on a specific partner. The death is not crazy or anything, but there is enough death in the game for player expression to be possible, and to try out different ideas over the course of multiple playthroughs, and that's really all that a single player RPG needs. Cool. At the end of the X-Naut base, we find the final star piece. It is finally time to open the 1000-Year Door. But while Mario is on his way to the legendary door, we still have to have a chat about one final thing. And that's the biggest strength of the game. The game's biggest asset, and the one thing that we haven't really waffled about so far. You see, at the beginning of the video, we chatted about how the 1000-Year Door is almost this Frankenstein monster of a game that is stitched together by different parts of other games. There's turn-based combat, there's platforming, there's puzzle solving, there are dungeons, there is a lot of dialogue, there's exploration, there are hidden secrets, there are Metroidvania power-ups that allow us to overcome roadblocks, there is backtracking, there are different partners with different combat abilities, and this is all stitched together into a D&D-like campaign setting using Mario tropes, while everything is made out of paper. The whole premise of the game is so bonkers, it should never work. But it works. It works brilliantly. How? How is Paper Mario able to be so many things at once and still feel like a cohesive package with a clear vision? And the answer? Well, the 1000-Year Door is extremely good at linking those systems together. Every system and game activity is linked to 2 central systems at the center of the game, and those systems are the combat system and the badges. The turn-based combat and the badges are what is gluing everything together. The exploration we do and the hidden items we uncover, well, those items or badges are either consumables for combat or teach us new combat moves. The puzzles we solve, well, once again they reward us with items or badges that help us in combat. The Metroidvania upgrades we get, well, those directly increase our combat power, unlock new skills and allow us to find even more badges. The stories of the different chapters that we journey through, well, over the course of those chapters we encounter new partners. Those partners help us once again in combat, and their unique field abilities once again make it possible to solve even more puzzles and explore even more spaces that in return once again reward us with better badges and items for combat. The crystal stars that we get at the end of the chapters, well, those unlock new star powers to use during combat as well. You see, the most meaningful moments of character progression in the 1000-Year Door don't necessarily happen when we level up. The most significant upgrades in power happen when we get a new upgrade and our attack power increases, or when we found enough star pieces to buy a really powerful badge, or when we solve a puzzle that rewards us with a badge that teaches us a new attack, or when we progress in the story and unlock a new partner, or when we finish a chapter and unlock a particularly useful star power. Leveling up after fights is just one of the ways we actually improve our combat abilities. Most increases in power actually happen when we interact with one of the other systems in the game. The game's systems are set up in a way where they can have us do anything, yet we still improve our combat abilities. The brilliance of the 1000-Year Door is that it has all its different systems and all the different gameplay types and genres tied into the combat system, most of the time via the brilliant badge system. The combat system and the badges are at the heart of the game. Those are the glue that ties everything together. And famously, the 1000-Year Door is the last game in the Paper Mario series that used both of those systems. All the other Paper Mario games that Nintendo made after ditched those two systems for something else. Some removed both systems entirely, some only removed the badges and instead tried weird combat systems without true progression that are built around consumable items, and some tried something completely different, like Origami King. And while I like most of the Paper Mario games that came after, not a single one of them comes together as brilliantly as the 1000-Year Door does. With the 1000-Year Door, Nintendo struck gold. They found a formula that is able to tie together even the strangest of genre mixes, but still work. You know, they could change the entire gameplay into a kart racer for an entire chapter, and as long as we still find badges, gain a new partner, and discover yum yum mushrooms, the game would still work. Heck, they even changed the gameplay into an arena fighter for a chapter, and it is my favorite chapter. But instead of trying to explore how much the genre mixing can be pushed using this brilliant formula, they instead decided to never use the same formula again. And this, gentle ladies, gentle Goombas, and gentle Koopas, is the tragedy of the 1000-Year Door. Nintendo came up with a formula that would have allowed them to mix and match pretty much every genre they could think of, but instead of exploring into this direction, they decided to ditch that direction and to instead give the franchise an identity crisis. And with this, it is finally time for us to open the 1000-Year Door and to find out what is locked behind. To everyone's big surprise, there is no precious treasure waiting for us, nor is it a powerful artifact. It is something much, much darker. You see, the gigantic locked door and the 7 crystal stars that were hidden all over the world were never meant to prevent anyone from getting in. They were always designed to prevent something from getting out. Behind the 1000-Year Door, a dangerous demon is imprisoned. The big bad evil plan of the evil bad X-Nauts was to use the evil and bad power of this bad and evil demon to do really evil and bad stuff. But even more bad and evil, it turns out that this demon needs a vessel to exist in our world. And this vessel is supposed to be Peach. And thus we make our way through the Shadow Palace, the final dungeon of the game, and a worthy send-off. But when we arrive, it is already too late. The evil demon, who turns out to be a creature called the Shadow Queen, has already possessed Peach. Even worse, the witch doesn't follow the commands of the X-Nauts, but instead progresses its own terrible agenda. We have to stop her, we have to defeat her. So, I know what you're currently thinking. Well, that doesn't sound that difficult, does it? We're a plumber of glass, a dangerous, sharp tool designed to cut our enemies into thousands of tiny pieces by jumping on their heads. Let's just jump on her head twice or thrice and Demon Queen be gone. And you would be right, exceptionally smart viewer, if it weren't for a complication. We can't beat her. She's too strong. Her magic is protecting her. She's invincible. And here we are, in our darkest hour, fighting a foe that we can't defeat, facing certain death, knowing that everything we love is about to be annihilated. But then, something amazing happens. You see, over the course of the game, we made it through 7 chapters, and in those 7 chapters, we helped countless people and made a lot of friends. We helped the people of Petalburg to get rid of their big little dragon problem. We helped the Punies to take back control over the tree that naturally belongs to them. We helped the fighters of the Glitzpit by uncovering a terrible conspiracy. We helped the people of Twilight Town that were transformed into pigs. We helped the rest of the crew of the shipwrecked ship to get back home. We had the passengers on the train and finally helped the Bob Arms to get the cannon back up and running again. Wherever we went, we helped someone. But not only did we help all those people, we also befriended them. And now, during our darkest hour, when all hope seems lost, our friends suddenly aid us. Suddenly the 7 power stars activate. Each one of them flies through the sky back to the chapter where we found it. And there, all the people we befriended and helped over the course of our journey now send us their positive energy, their wishes, and tell us how much they appreciate us. And this energy is reaching us. The Punies are screaming that we shall keep fighting and not to give up. The other pit fighters are sending us their strength and their love. The Twilight people are telling us to never give in and to believe in ourselves. The people on the island are cheering that we can do this. The people in the city of Poshley Heights are telling us to get them. And the Bob Arms are sending us an explosive wave of bombastic energy. And through the magic of the crystal stars, we can hear them all. All the energy and the love of our friends is reaching us. Now in our final moments, all our friends are rooting for us. And it is this power of love and friendship that breaks the spell that is protecting the evil queen. Suddenly, she becomes vulnerable. And I cannot tell you how much I love this moment in the game. The game plays this scene so unapologetically straight. It commits to the idea of our friends cheering for us without any restraint. The whole thing is so over the top that it is almost camp. And I truly love it. The 1000-Year Door is this crazy and long adventure in which we befriend and help dozens of different characters. So it is only fitting that all the people that we previously helped are, in the end, what is allowing us to succeed. The game commits so uncompromisingly to this idea in this scene. It really sticks the landing, in my humble opinion. All that we have to do now is to finish off the Demon Queen, powered by the power of love, friendship, and a broken build that is no true challenge anymore. We defeat the Demon Queen, Princess Peach is safe, the Exnauts are defeated, and the world is safe once again. And with this Paper Mario, the 1000-Year Door comes to an end. Paper Mario, the 1000-Year Door, is an almost perfect game. Apart from maybe 1 or 2 slow sections and a couple of smaller UI stumbles, the game is as good as video games get. But the game is even more. The game is a huge creative firework, throwing ideas, jokes, witty characters, crazy situations and interesting scenarios at us in quantities that would be enough for 10 games. It mixes several genres, yet somehow manages to flawlessly capture the gameplay of each of them. This incredibly fast pace, a joy from beginning to end, and at least in my Bumble Onion, it deserves a spot among the very best games Nintendo ever made. There's just one thing that I truly dislike about the game, and that is that Nintendo never made more of it. Hooray! And with this, we already reached the end of this little video, and I just now realize that this video didn't feature a single paper pun. Well, that's terrible. Before we wrap this up, just a couple more things. So first, a gigantic dragon-sized thank you to all my exceptionally wonderful patrons whose names are currently scrolling by. Videos like this one have a really tough time surviving on YouTube because the YouTube algorithm doesn't follow any predictable patterns that allow us to predict how well or badly a video performs, which is a huge problem if it takes several weeks and far over 100 hours to produce a video like this one. The wonderful people whose names are currently scrolling by are making sure that I still somehow get by, even if the algorithm is in demon mode. Second, 2 more things that I wanted to mention in the video but that didn't fit. So first, there were some pretty significant changes made to the dialogue of Vivian. You see, in the original Japanese version of the game, Vivian had a couple of lines of dialogue that were hinting at her being a trans girl that were not present in the original English dub. The remake changed this dialogue to better reflect the original intentions of the developers, and Vivian is now clearly canonically trans in the English version of the game as well. I don't have anything to add to this other than that I thought it deserves a mention, that this is probably the second reason why a certain part of the internet got totally, proportionally angry about the game, and that I'm happy for Vivian. Good for you, girl. Second, I quickly wanted to chat about the paper plane minigame. So actually, I need your advice. Wise and reasonable YouTube comment section. You see, after beating the 1000-year door, I may have developed a slightly addictive relationship with this dumb little game. I may or may not have put half a dozen hours into this game mode trying to get a really good high score. So here's the thing, the 700-meter line is the very last line, and I'd love it to fly my paper plane folded plumber above this line at least once in my life. But I just can't do it. The furthest I get the dumb little paper plane is to about 640 meters. So if someone has a tip on how to fulfill an aging YouTuber's dream of flying a paper plane 60 virtual meters further, well, let's say we're taking suggestions. Who and Ray, and with this it's time to wrap this up. I hope you enjoyed this little video. If you enjoyed it, leaving a thumbs up is what Togepi would do. If you're interested in more videos discussing games in depth, subscribing might be a good idea. And if you really enjoyed the video and want to help videos like this one survive on the platform, then there is also the option to support the channel via Patreon. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time. The item that was hidden in the chest in the middle of Rogueport was the final hammer upgrade. Lots of hugs.